When are you fully present to what you are doing? What completely absorbs your attention? Where do you find your flow? This is just one topic I discuss in my conversation with the Reverend Steve Paulikas, an esteemed colleague and close friend. Now, we don't use the word flow, but it occurred to me afterwards when I was listening to how eloquently he defines the work that we priests do when we preside, or, as he says, create a container for a group of people to be together in a unique way. That work, my friends, is not just about worship, and it's certainly not just for priests. It's a quality of attention you and I choose when we want to bring all of who we are to where we are and who we are with, like an intentional conversation. I believe that's available to all of us. It's what calls us into vocations, careers, relationships. It's where we find meaning. And I hope this conversation invites your reflection on where you might want to be fully present just a little bit more to people and places, unique experiences in your own life. We also laugh a lot in this conversation as we discuss things like RuPaul's Drag Race, friendship, watershed moments, and how our English word love just isn't quite big enough for all the facets of meaning that word contains. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Let's get to it. Hi there, Steve Paulikas.
Hello, Ariane.
This is a conversation I've been excited about because not only are you a wonderful colleague, but you are a dear friend of mine. And I'm really, really excited to get to talk with you.
Well, as you know, the feeling is mutual. And there have been so many times over the many years we've known each other that I've kind of thought like, boy, wouldn't other people benefit from hearing the conversation that we are having right now? Because we both have a tendency sometimes to think slightly highly of ourselves. But I think over the years, as we've known each other, there's been a balancing out, sort of with that, magic ingredient of humility that only life can sort of serve you. Honestly, the conversations that you and I have are first and foremost like generative and healing to ourselves. It's genuinely interesting, I think, to other people what it is that we do, and not just like being a priest, but like we've both kind of gone so deeply into it in its own kind of way, and based on our own experience, that it is really interesting. And I have learned so much from you, and so much of who I am and what I do and my vocation is like you, along with our other friends. And they're just like, I think that's the way any vocation sort of evolved. So I'm excited to have this conversation as well.
Yay. There are so many places where I could start. I want to say just for a minute how you and I came to know each other, which is through General Theological Seminary. We both started there and with the intention of being ordained to the priesthood. I know for a fact that when I first met you, I was instantly intimidated. And I do tend to gravitate towards people, even if not right away. Some of my closest friends from both my undergraduate and from all my life, actually, are people where my initial feeling towards them had to do with, oh my gosh, that person is really impressive, and I don't even know that I'm worthy of being their friend. And you fell into that category. I know that sounds silly, but don't you? I bet you've had those people in your life. Surely you have those people in your life.
I mean, it's possible that our respective motivations for being attracted to people might be different. I don't know. I mean, I think about like the messy 26-year-old I was when you met me, and find it hard to believe you were intimidated by that. But there's a sort of alchemy that happens, I think, with certain personalities, and for all the sort of like weirdness and frustration that seminary was for me as well, one thing it did provide us was this like container to just explore relationships and what it means to live in community, and the possibilities that are there when you find people who are sort of fellow travelers on this spiritual journey. I think once we talked about how like the word journey needs to be banned from any church stuff, but
I know.
anyway, I just did it.
Well, I know. No, but we should. Well, that needs to come up later in the conversation. I'm sure I'll remember. I'm going to put a pin in that in my head, because journey is so often associated with the spiritual and the path and the idea that, life is not a destination, it's a journey. Yes. However, we should spend some time maybe.
Can you get like a soundboard for your podcast? So like, anytime I say the word journey, it could be like or like a ding dong or some sort of like obnoxious church bells or something.
And yet, I got to believe there are people listening to this podcast that very much need to remember that they're on a journey. And this has already taken me into 3 different questions that I want to ask.
Okay.
One of which it has to do with the messy 26-year-old that I met, who met a messy 36-year-old at that time. And gosh, just so much messiness at the beginning of seminary, probably for a lot of us. But some of our messiness, we tried very much to get rid of through very instant critiques and value judgments, wouldn't you say?
No, absolutely. And whenever you're reflecting back on, and at least whenever I reflect back on some sort of project that I began, especially something that's so like identity forming as seminary, is like, of course you look back and think like, oh, I can't believe I thought and did those things. And it's very important to create the space to allow that, like, because otherwise how do you grow? I mean, like, the worst thing is if you approach any spiritual endeavor assuming that you have already arrived at the conclusion or need to. There's just no room for growth. So, I guess you could say I'm a messy 43-year-old now, but I'm also a 43-year-old who's learned a lot from the past. And maybe the older I get, the more I'm comfortable with my own vulnerability, accepting it as an aspect of humanity that gives us the opportunity to learn more and to grow. Wouldn't you say?
Yes, you're so smart. I got a little lost in all the words of intelligence that were being woven around there.
Okay, sure.
Sorry, but no, because I was thinking, I was trying to say to myself, what am I feeling as Steve is saying this to me? This is something that I try and do to pay attention to, like an embodied feeling in my body when somebody is talking to me. And one of the images that's coming to my mind actually is my daughter, because this may sound strange, but my daughter is an only child. As she was growing up, she's now a teenager about to embark into college. I saw aspects of you in her because she's an only child and you're an only child. And part of that I would define as a feeling of autonomy and confidence in who you are and in what your needs are, and being pretty clear with what you need in particular moments. I mean, there was somewhat of a journey in you going from 0 to me meeting you at General Theological Seminary. So can you tell me a little bit about what you were feeling and thinking as that only child stepping into seminary, and, why were you there? What in the world made you want to do this very bizarre job for a living?
Well, if we go to the only child thing, I mean, I think most only children like me are sort of often bemused at the fascination that people with siblings have about us, because we don't really think about you that often. So, I mean, I guess it's fine. We're also used to attention. So to me, it's just the way I grew up and it's my life. You all can have, your own stuff. And I'm happy, when I met you, Dorothea was 6 months old, something like that.
Yeah, you were little. 9 months, 9 months when I started seminary.
9 months. Yeah. amazing. So like, yeah, amazing. We've known each other that long. In terms of coming to seminary, I wasn't raised in any particularly religious household. We weren't really churchgoers. My grandmother would take me to church every once in a while. I grew up in suburban Detroit, and it's an incredibly diverse community. So my friends' parents came from India, from Syria, from Eastern Europe, all different kinds of places. There's a very large Jewish community where I grew up. And so everyone kind of had their thing, like their temple or their mosque. And I didn't really have anything. And I was searching for more of like a spiritual identity. And like literally my friends in high school, I'd be like, so, what'd you do? And I remember my friends one time was like, well, I just meditated all day. And like, I mean, I just wanted something like that. So I started going to church, like asking my mom to take me. And I was baptized in a United Methodist church. And so I thought that would be a good place to start. And I really enjoyed it. And, just for a variety of reasons, things happened. And we started looking for another one. And my mom suggested going to the Episcopal church in town. And that sounds like, oh, the Episcopal church in town. But the Episcopal church in town is this like, glorious monument of architecture and, amazing choir with, world-class music. And that's the little church in town. So, but the funny thing is that the first time we ever went, I remember it was September, I was in ninth grade, and the church was packed. And the priest gave this really amazing sermon, and everyone stood up and applauded at the end. And we're like, wow, this place is really happening. And we walked outside, there were news cameras. We're like, wow, it's really, and we went home, and it turned out it was the first Sunday after this like huge scandal had broken at the church, where the rector had done some, really inappropriate things. And so everyone was there sort of like rallying for it. So that was actually my first exposure to the Episcopal Church, was this combination of just sort of the grandeur of it that can so easily transport one in a spiritual sense, and this sort of like vision of community that is almost kind of both in this world and also not of this world. And also just the fact that it's a group of human beings who make a lot of mistakes, and we as an institution are constantly sort of groping forward while also getting kicked back a little bit.
Okay,
what were you going to say?
So I want to just rewind a little bit.
Sure.
How old were you when you expressed this need to your mom to go find a church?
12, 13.
And you talked about having friends at this age. Wow. I mean, that's really that we're saying like, oh, I meditated, or, oh, this is a part of my life. And there was this part of you that related to that. And you used the word spiritual, but you said, I wanted some of that. What is that? What is the thing? What is was it a feeling you were looking for? Was it belonging?
Definitely both of those. I'm not sure I could have articulated it that way at the time. I mean, I always knew God. I feel like I've always, I don't know, it's like kind of a weird, I don't know if it's a gift or just an aspect of who I am. Like I've never questioned the existence of God because I intuitively feel God so present. And I guess I wanted to learn how to cultivate that relationship. And definitely a sense of belonging in a tradition that would help get me there and sustain me along that path. And to be certain, the church has given me that. I mean, there's no question about it. And I'm so grateful for it. I think also just growing up in a place as diverse as mine and having this experience, I've never questioned the validity of other traditions either. I just wanted something that was authentic to who I am. And it could have gone in many different directions, but I guess I just kind of figured because all of my ancestors had been Christians, that would make sense for me. So it's like the path. I feel like the path chose me. And so, and I was just sort of consenting to it. I think it's also important as we're sort of, pastors to youth as well as adults, just to remember like the incredible richness of their spiritual sensibilities and how I don't think of them as, oftentimes I think about like what I can learn from them, because I remember what it felt like for me at that time and just how in tune I was with so many things having to do with, God and prayer. And it was all came very simply. I mean, when I was in ninth grade, I read the Bible every morning and every night.
Hmm.
Like, I read through the Bible in one year, and I had like a little table, and I'd read the New Testament in the morning, the Old Testament at night, and just
Really?
made, yeah,
That's
I
so
did.
funny because
Yeah.
I like picked up, I remember being maybe like 10 or 11, 12, like somewhere in that age, and wanting something that had to do with cultivating this relationship with God that I inherently, intuitively felt. And I went and got the Bible down from the bookshelf and I opened it up and I read about three and I was like, oh my God, this is so boring. I was like, I can't do it. So the way I did it was I sang Godspell. I would come home many, many days and just sing through the Broadway album of Godspell. That worked for what I needed. And I still don't mind singing my way through. Did this morning, actually. Not Godspell, though. That's fascinating to me. And also it's fascinating to me the desire for a regimented way of being in relationship.
Yeah, I think I have the non-regimented way down pretty easily. And so that's just my personality. I tend to grow when there's some sort of structure that facilitates the sort of, free-floating creativity that sort of I seem to be pretty capable of tapping into.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So structure is really helpful, and different people have different personalities and act different ways. And sometimes I wonder if folks might turn their structure into a sort of idol where they wind up,
Mm-hmm.
worshiping the structure,
Yeah.
as opposed to using it as the thing. So that's not my issue. I have plenty of other issues, but that's, that's just not one of them.
What did your parents think about this?
I thought it was really weird. But then they, yeah, because they're boomers and had left the church and didn't really, were kind of like, what is going on? And I was obviously an eccentric teenager, so that's fine. I don't know, maybe they were probably happy I was doing that. That was my form of rebellion and not, other stuff that teenagers do. But eventually they started coming to church with me. And then, they became churchgoers themselves and started going every Sunday, especially once my dad retired. And, this tradition, this Episcopal tradition, became such a part of our family. It's one of the ways I think it's like actually quite organic, even though it can seem a little formal if you're not accustomed to it, if you sort of walk into an Episcopal church. But, when my dad was dying, we used to use, there's a little thing in the prayer book for devotions for individuals and families. We say the morning one, like my dad and my mom and me, every morning, and sort of cry it out, and then just let the day unfold.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a weird thing that I sort of, it's something that was within me that I followed, and turned out I sort of, kind of in a weird way, my engaging with it allowed my parents to engage with it in their own
Well,
ways. Yeah.
I wouldn't say it was a weird way. I mean, I'm realizing as you're talking, especially talking about having this practice when your dad was dying and you were really present with him. And I had actually been thinking about that a little bit before this conversation. Those regimented practices are very comforting.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Very
Yeah.
comforting.
Yeah. There was this German, this is an anthropologist, Konrad Lorenz, who wrote about animal behavior.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's not anthropology. It's whatever the animal equivalent of anthropology is.
Mm-hmm.
Behavioral science. I don't know. So he
I
wrote a
don't
lot
know.
about how animals have rituals, and actually it helps maintain the like aggression and different sort of negative feelings in whatever animal group it is, like
Mm-hmm.
wolves and stuff like that, and that the aggression sort of erupts when the ritual is broken, because rituals just channel so much positive and negative energy that we have. And you can see that in liturgy. There's when you or I change like one little thing in the liturgy, people notice it right away. And it can tend, you kind of don't even know like what emotion that little thing in the liturgy is holding for someone or for the group until you break it, because then it's just out in the open. So of course, yeah, I mean, like that, I guess you're getting at sort of like structure, practice, habit. Yeah, no, I mean, we need these things because we're not chaotic beings. Like we need rhythm. And when we don't have it, it's very unsettling.
In a conversation that hasn't come out yet, that I have with a good friend of mine who's a leadership coach, actually, we were talking about church and religion and how I know right now we're in this period of, radical decline and just sweeping decimation of the amount of people regularly engaging with a faith community and any sort of high level of Christian theological discourse in any public space. But I said in this conversation, I have religion will continue for forever, because for forever we will need rituals and practices, and we will need people that we look to take us through those rituals and practices. You used the word container when you talked about seminary and this idea of yearning. I will point out, by the way, just with some New York sarcasm, that for somebody who claims such joy of their singlehood and being an only child, you did crave intentional community and a sense of belonging with other people who, in terms of our faith, we do refer to as brothers and sisters. So
sure. Okay, fair enough. Okay, fair enough. You got me.
But it's connected to the animal psychology of needing to be in relationship with people, that this is part of our deepest makeup. Just part of our deepest makeup, I think you and I believe, is an inherent spirituality where we need to be in relationship with whatever the higher power that we determine or name as being the source of our self or the source of creation. We want to cultivate that relational awareness in ways that you mentioned, connect with your ancestors. You were born, the path chose you. You were born into it. I often tell people, well, that's why I'm Christian, because I was just born at a certain time, in a certain place, a certain family. And that's what we practiced. And I wandered away and experienced some other things and then came back, because you just can't help but kind of know it in a familial way that is as comforting as those rituals and practices.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about, you were talking about when you make a change in the liturgy, and just liturgy is just another word for worship and the structure of the worship service, and how one small change can affect an entire emotional state of a community. So one of the reasons I want to do this podcast is priests are feeling beings who think, and yet I think and have experienced people see us sometimes in such a definitive role. We're there for such a specific purpose, and they come with so much preconceptions regarding who we are and what we offer. And they come with all their own things that they're desiring when they come to church for whatever reason. And we are asked, and you and I think, take pretty seriously how we're developing and cultivating this container for a community of people who will gather for one time and will never gather in that exact same way again, to have both a experience of God, a transcendent experience, and some connection with their emotional, embodied reality in this moment. That's a lot, I think. And I want to just ask you about when you started down this journey, when you started towards the priesthood, did you have any concept of that? Had that been part of your experience? Like now that you've been doing it for 15 years?
Interesting. I don't think I understood that fully. And there is a little bit of, a lot of clergy use this very crude metaphor of like making the sausage. You kind of, one of the transitions you go through when you're ordained, it's a very different experience being behind the altar
Mm-hmm.
versus in the congregation. And it can be, there's a temptation sometimes, I think, to become a little bit cynical or transactional about
Mm-hmm.
what it is that we do. I resolved very early on in our training always to be present in worship, whether I was leading it
Mm-hmm.
or not leading it. And that was a smart decision, I have to say. And I learned it by, we had a chapel that had 3 services a day. And so there were a variety of presiders and presiding types. And I was very aware when someone leading worship was present or not present. If they were thinking about, do they have to turn the page next? Or if they were thinking about if they were embodying the words that they were actually saying.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I find it's actually a lot easier to embody the words than to be worried about, like, is that person standing over there, or is that person
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be carrying the candle in that direction? And I find that, like, the people who are assembled and worshiping with us are also aware of that usually on a kind of unconscious level, so that when someone pays me like a very high compliment and says, like, I really like the way that you preside, I think what they're saying is, I liked that we were able to be present together
Mm.
for this numinous experience. Like, thank you for guiding me in this, for guiding the community in this. And it's a tremendous privilege. I mean, you say it's a big thing, but it's a tremendous privilege. And
Mm-hmm.
the great thing about having your vocation being creating containers is that I don't have to do the work of making sure someone gets connected to God. I mean, I'm leaving that to God, but I do have the privilege of, like, creating the circumstances to allow that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a lot of what being a priest is setting the table for the banquet that takes place. And, you don't have to, cook all the food, and you don't even have to you invite the guests. You let everyone know that everyone is welcome. But the feast is essentially prepared by God. A lot of what we do is, pick out the color of the tablecloth and set the time of the meal, and definitely wash the dishes and figure out
Mm.
something to do with the scraps. But that's a privilege, and that's definitely not what I was thinking about when I went to seminary. So the way our system works, when you feel that you're called to be a priest, you sort of present yourself to your priest, and then there's a whole process that involves not only your church, but the diocese, which is the geographical region of all the churches. And I administered the discernment process for priests and deacons in my diocese for 7 years. And I truly enjoyed it. It was a tremendous privilege, just hearing people's stories, walking with them. And, oftentimes people just bring so much. But the thing that was consistent for me was, like, that I see in people's calls, and I felt in my own call, was the sense of, like, if it's with you, it's not going to go away. Like, you don't have to worry about that. It's a lot like, getting married to someone. It may or may not be the right decision in that moment, or it may or may not be the right decision in the future, but it's like, you can't get the idea out of your head.
The call, you're saying the call, if the call is with you.
Yeah. If the call is with you. And I think the same, call to ordination is a lot like a call to being a queer person. That's just like, even if you try to run from it, it's like not leaving you. So,
So you're saying it's almost you thinking of it like an identity, and then wanting to really claim it.
I think identity is an aspect of it, but since we're going there, it's something deeper than identity. It's a mode of being. Like, identity, I guess I think of as something that is a way that we conceive of ourselves and then communicate it to ourselves in the outside world.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this type of call I'm talking about is like, no, you are this.
Mm.
You are this. And no matter what you do, you're not going to be able to get out from under it.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, you'll make yourself kind of miserable if you keep trying to run from it. So I think that's how I came to seminary, was with that basic sense of it. And then over time, like, you kind of learn the craft of it. And I hope I'm still learning the craft of it.
So let me ask you a question, because this is making me want to formulate a sentence that I haven't thought of before, because I personally struggle with the idea of call. I didn't feel, to me, I never felt comfortable using the term call, that I was called into the priesthood. But one of the things when I'm listening to you talk, it's making me think the profession of the priesthood was a way in which I could live into being who I was and who I am. The profession of the priesthood offered me an opportunity to be my fullest self in service of other people and in service of my own desires for what I felt I was supposed to be bringing into the world with this one life I get to live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're using the word profession. Sometimes people use the word vocation. And vocation just means calling. It's from, the Latin word for voice or call.
I know, I do that very intentionally, Steve, because one of the things you and I have talked about so much over the years is sometimes, and I'll speak for myself, the challenge and struggle I have when I don't feel that the institutional body of which we are a part makes a point of acknowledging the professional aspects of our job, because we do for both of us, actually, both of us are rectors. So we are ordained priests, and that's a recognition of an aspect of the way we serve through the church. And our job is to be a rector, which is to be the presider, the priest, and the preacher at a specific community and congregation. And sometimes I think we get very wishy-washy in our language and their ways in which we talk about the priesthood and the calling and the vocation. And we would be doing ourselves a great service to have a little more clarity with the professional responsibilities and expectations and role we have as clergy people. So that's what I think sometimes I have a lot of resistance to the word calling, and also because it's so associated with spirituality and faith and religion. And every single person in the world is called into a vocation.
Well, let's break it down, though. I mean, like you mentioned all these, really lovely things about being a rector. You're the preacher and presider, but you're also the fundraiser. You're the staff manager. You're the disciplinarian. You're and for years at my church, I took out the trash. I drew the line at shoveling the walk. I was like, I'm not shoveling the walk.
See, I would have done that one because I could have maybe burned some calories. The trash one, I would not have done. I definitely have put salt down. Definitely have done that.
But yeah, so that's definitely the professional aspect of it. But none of that makes sense to me without the spiritual vocation part, because otherwise we're just running like a mediocre not-for-profit. The thing that the magic in it is the vocational aspect. And I see all of those other institutional tasks as a response that emanates from the vocational aspect of it. And that's not just for me, that's for everyone there. I mean, it's for the many, many, many lay people who dedicate so much of their time and their heart and their money to the church. They're living out their vocations as well. So we're all doing it together. And honestly, to me, none of it makes any sense at all without God. So I guess I see the two things as maybe a little bit more intertwined than what you described.
So I'm going to shift for a minute because I want people to also see a side of you that I get to see that has to do with friendship and love and fun. Because I think all of us do some, we're talking about reflecting on our past and like the story and what brings us into our professions and our callings. And one of the things I think is important to do as we get older is to look at what some of the watershed moments in our lives were, right? Like real before and after times.
Oh, no.
And this is no. If anybody is going to burst into tears about this, it'll be me. So back in 2014, maybe it was 2015. I don't know if it was 2014 or 2015, but my first marriage had ended, and I was in a period of year-long separation before we could file for divorce, and really kind of alone for the first time in my life, because I had met my first husband when we were at college. I was 18. I had decided we would be getting married, and we wound up doing that 10 years after that. well, less than 10 years after that. But being with myself was kind of a new experience for me. And big surprise, I was depressed a lot of the time. And I would really muster my joyful energy for my job, which was preaching the good news and being, a presence of support and hope, encouragement to people. But then when I spent time alone with myself, and especially because my daughter was 8 at the time, and she would be with her dad some weekends and then with me. And those weekends in particular, when she wasn't with me, were excruciatingly painful. And at a certain point, it was the springtime, I believe. I gotta believe it was 2015. And I think it was March or April.
It was after Easter.
It was after Easter. And Easter, thanks be to God, you're so resurrection, new life, renewal. It's a new day. I immediately start thinking of Diana Ross singing "Can You Feel a Brand New Day" from The Wiz whenever I think of the resurrection. And Rowan Williams, who's the former Archbishop of Canterbury, was coming to speak at the Carmelite Monastery here in Baltimore, which is a source of a profound spiritual community for me. And I said, hey, amazing place, amazing. First monastery in the United States. So I got in touch with you and I was like, hey, Rowan Williams is coming here to speak. And I think he was speaking on religious communities, right? And I think so. I don't even remember what he was talking about. He was talking about the church. Like he was here to speak about the church.
Yes.
And I said, do you want to come up and spend a weekend and we'll hang out and we can go see this thing? And you and I did. And I want to get to a very specific point in the story. So just bear with me for a second. So you and I went to see Rowan Williams in a sanctuary packed with nuns. What could be more fun than that, honestly? And of course, as I said, you are always an intelligent, intimidating person. I think you were one of the first people that raised their hand when Rowan Williams said, does anybody have any questions? And I don't even, you asked something about community, the future, people outside. I don't remember, but I do remember Rowan's response was, well, you have asked the most important question. And I was like, of course he did. Of course.
It was the first question. It was the most important.
The most important question.
It was both. So yeah, that's only child could pull that off.
I know. So that was great. And that was enjoyable. And then the next day we just were going to hang out. And so we hung out on my couch and you said, Ariane, you have to watch this thing because it's going to help you feel better. And we watched RuPaul's Drag Race for 5 hours. And it literally blew my mind.
We watched season 5. Yeah.
I had never seen RuPaul's Drag Race. The black and white dualistic thinking that I have slowly transitioned out of as I grow into my adulthood had never allowed me to even be aware of something like RuPaul's Drag Race. I think I knew who RuPaul was because he was he was a famous person. I have, correct me if I say anything incorrectly regarding any of this, but I laughed so hard, not at people, but with people, and with how much I identified with every single thing the contestants in that show were talking about. So what is it about that show, Steve Paulikas, that relates? Because you're laughing, and we all know that we're getting to the point that you actually, at your wedding, which was the first wedding I ever preached after getting divorced, at your wedding, you had a drag performer with half your congregation there, and I was sitting there like, holy shit. Okay, sorry, that was the first swear word on this podcast, and I'm not going to swear a lot on this podcast, but oh my gosh, you had the courage to have a drag queen at your wedding, which blew my mind. And watching that for a number of reasons, but let's go. RuPaul's Drag Race. What is it? How does that connect with our profession as priests?
I was not expecting this question. Boy, did you have an hour for this? Because wow. Actually, what you said after I watched, I think, episode 2 of season 5, which is the lip sync episode. You said, I can't believe I go to the grocery store and people are just walking around, and this is also happening, and no one even knows about it.
Especially if you knew the grocery store around the corner from the
I've been
rectory
to it.
where I
think we
lived
went
at
to
the
it right
time.
after
That's
that.
right.
Yeah,
And it's like
yeah.
every adorable other little neighborhood grocery store you can imagine.
Yeah. Well, there's so many lessons from it. As RuPaul ends every episode saying, if you can't love yourself, how the hell can you love somebody else? Can I get an amen? And
Yes.
that's boy, what if we do say that in church, and a lot more. It's a little bit more, loving other people and loving God. There's not a whole lot of loving yourself. And I have like tested some like RuPaul concepts and sermons, and it just sounds a little bit too much like trying to be a drag queen instead of a priest, because there is a distinction, alas. But hey, look, we put on these elaborate costumes. We get up in front of people. You can pretend like you don't enjoy the attention. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but we clearly are putting ourselves in the center of attention, wearing these like crazy outfits, and delivering a message. And that's a lot of what drag queens do. And the crazy thing about it is that like as a priest, we are exploring ever greater depths of our own authenticity through something that is like an abstract form of the priesthood. And that's actually what drag queens do too.
Yeah.
I've gotten to know a bunch of drag queens over the years, and as you said, like Alaska performed at our who's also a contestant on season 5, as you may remember, was performed at our wedding reception. And, I did notice some members of the congregation left, but others were like kind of fascinated. And that included my family members. Some family members were like, I can't take this. And, I could deal with the gay wedding almost. The drag show was a step too far for me. But it was a celebration. Also, it was my darn wedding, and
that's right.
Alaska wore a wedding dress to it, because there was no one wearing a wedding dress at our wedding. That's what we requested. So she did. There are so many things in that, and I know like a lot of times preachers of a different ilk might make sort of sports analogies and stuff in their sermons, and I wish sometimes I could just quote things from Drag Race, and sometimes I do, and no one even knows it.
Right.
There's a lot to it. I think also the humor and the joy of it is very real. There are limitations, though. I mean, so there's a lot of there's a lot of messy behavior in Drag Race, which there is in church too. A lot of tears, but there's a reality. I think there's a desire to connect with something that is. This is the crazy thing. RuPaul's Drag Race is a reality show in which all of the contestants are playing a character, and you never even know the name on their birth certificate over the course of the show. Right. It's like, that's the paradox of it. So that to me is just like the most compelling television imaginable.
So sorry to interrupt you. Did you
please.
So so that was this incredibly joyful day. And the watershed moment, I mean, there was a little bit of having my mind blown by letting go of some of my binaries with sexuality. But the watershed moment for me was once you left, right? And that next week. So first of all, part of this whole podcast is like me bringing my whole self, which get teary at times. But it was so powerful because I had not felt joy for months before that weekend, like zero. And I'm a pretty happy person. Like that's kind of like my inner compass is kind of set to joy and being in a good mood. But nothing to be a Debbie Downer like getting divorced, right? That was a big downer on a lot of levels. And I remember when you left, one of the things we talk about in the church and certainly have explained in who knows how many sermons, that there are 5 words for love in Greek. Jesus and the Gospels have 5 words, and we only have this one. And the
Mm.
most important is what? Philia.
Agape?
No,
Oh, Philia.
philia. Yeah.
I failed
No,
the
it wasn't a
test.
test. I thought, no, it's not a test. It's not a test. Oh my God, no tests on my podcast. No. So the most important is philia. No one has greater love than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends. That's what Jesus says. And first of all, it was an eye-opening experience of what that is, because it was really an awareness that you could have a depth of love with a friend that was entirely platonic. It wasn't your, soulmate person. It's something I think Thomas Merton talked about once when he said, the best thing about friendship is it's something you get to carry with you because you're not in the presence of the person all the time, but it's like something you always hold and you're aware of it. So that was the watershed moment. And actually, I do remember saying to my therapist, of course, like, that's the thing I'm craving, and actually realizing how incredibly meaningful and important friendship is to one's fullness of life. Well, that was just a huge watershed, life-changing experience.
Oh, Ariane. I remember that time with so much joy as well. And just imagine all the people listening to this podcast, maybe, who either have experienced periods of time in their lives when they haven't been able to feel joy, or are in that right now. And you can start to believe that it'll never be there again.
Yes.
Like that's the thing. I know after my dad died, my mom, a couple months afterwards, obviously she was super down. But she called me one day and she's like, "You'll never guess what I just did." And I was like, "What?" And she's like, "I just jumped out of a plane." Yeah. She's like, she's like, and I was like, "Well, how was it?" She's like, I feel something again. She's like, "The first time I felt anything in months, and I just wanted to feel something." And that's a spiritual experience. I mean, what you experienced in our weekend together was absolutely the work of the Spirit. I mean, there's no question about it. And I think we're constantly being knit together. And that's the amazing thing about having companions like what we've had for, we've known each other for 17 years, Ariane. And we've seen each other through a lot of things. And, I love you. And I know you love me too. And I'm saying that in using one of those 5 Greek words, like philia kind of way, because we're spiritual companions. That's the amazing thing. And for all of its faults, for all of its warts, the church provides that. The church creates the circumstances for people to find spiritual companions.
That's one of the things that I feel like we don't do. No, that's not the right word. It's not our job to do that. That's God's work in the world. And that happens. And it's not always going to be through specificity of the community that you and I call church. But it really is such a gift that you get in a community of people that you didn't ask to be connected with, but you got connected with.
Correct.
And the bishop that sent Bishop Mark Sisk, a bishop of New York, was the one who put me through my ordination process, or bishop at that time. And I remember asking him almost at one point, like, what's even the point of this whole living at seminary? Like, what is the point of this? And he said, it's all about the people you're going to meet. He said that the people you meet there and the relationships that you forge and carry into your ministry are going to be some of the most important relationships for the rest of your life. And I do love you too. And yes, yes.
I know that
is true.
You don't even,
I know.
You don't even have to say it. Like,
I know.
But I think about, if folks listening to this, if anything, I hope this conversation maybe, it's reminding me of how precious those relationships are, that they ask to be nourished, and it's a joy to nourish them. So I don't think that when they're neglected, it's because of anything other than just, we get busy with other things, and there's nothing wrong with it, because then you meet up with your spiritual companion
Right.
years later, and it's like time hasn't really passed.
Yep.
So there's something remarkable about that. And it is the work of the Spirit. I mean, there's no question about it. And so we get to sort of like, rejoice in that and benefit from it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, church isn't the only place where that where that happens. And you and I have spiritual companions from places outside church as well. But it does just so happen that, like, because the whole enterprise is set up to create circumstances like that it's a rich place to find people like that.
It can be. It can also be a rich place to walk in and be like, yeah, no, none of this, thanks, bye.
Well, but that's not the topic of today's podcast.
No,
we can.
It's not. All right. So I'm mindful of time, and I want to thank you for making time. And I want to close by just asking you, what do you want to share about anything going on in your life, or something that you just think is important to close with? Or I'm just going to turn it to you.
Well, this is actually usually one of the challenges on RuPaul's Drag Race, and
really?
the contestants have to plug whatever their new like makeup line or their new book that they wrote or something, or the tour they're going on. So I don't really have anything to plug at the moment. I'm super grateful to you for this time together. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to be sure and plug all the cool things you've done when I write the show notes for this podcast.
Okay.
Some of your articles and some of the things you contribute to the world, because I think they're very much worth sharing.
Thank you very much, Ariane. I appreciate that.
All right. So does he say like sashay away at the end of RuPaul's Drag Race?
Well,
what's that?
So it depends who wins the lip sync. So the person, the contestant who wins the lip sync is Shantae, you stay. And the one who's eliminated is sashay away. So if you're eliminating me from your podcast.
No, I'm not.
Okay. All right.
No.
Good. Okay. You can, the other thing RuPaul says is, like the real world, RuPaul's Drag Race is a competition. So you could crown me the winner of the podcast if you wanted to at the end of the season. Okay. All right. Okay. Good. Do I win $100,000 and a lifetime supply of NYX cosmetics? Because I'll take that.
You win a lifetime of me staying your friend. Whether you want it or not.
That's worth even more. Won't pay the bills, but it will feed my soul.
Okay. All right, my friend. Thank you for this time.
All right, Ariane. Thank you so much.
Till next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.